it's read. Now, I don't know if you guys ever have to deal with this, but I find that when people, or especially people that don't engage in reading as actively, I tend to be met with a sort of dual response when people find out that I like books and that I am a reader. There's always going to be that little bit of respect because society sort of values reading as part of gaining knowledge. So if you're somebody that enjoys reading and reads a lot, there's going to be a little bit of respect for that. That being said, I find that when a lot of people find out that I'm a reader and that I like books, that for some weird reason, I seem to be just not taken seriously. I don't know if you guys ever have this issue, but I find that as a reader, people do not always take me seriously because of it. One of the most common occurrences, and I know I'm not alone in this, is when I'm actually reading out where there are other people. Obviously, if I'm reading alone in my bedroom, this is not going to be an issue. But if I'm out in the living room, maybe I'm out in public, maybe I'm sitting in a coffee shop, but I'm out in public in some way reading. And I've got my book, and I'm really into my book. And sometimes it's somebody I don't know, and sometimes it's somebody that happened to recognize me or somebody who maybe lives with me. They go, "Oh, hey, what are you doing? Are you busy?" And they walk over to me, seeing me reading, and they ask what I'm doing, and I'm like, "Oh, I'm reading," as if that's not totally obvious by the book in my hands. And they go, "Oh, cool, you're not busy," and they proceed to start talking. Now, don't get me wrong. I like having conversations with my friends. I like meeting new people. I don't know about that part. But I like talking to people that I know and I care about. And I do. But there's a time and a place for it. And generally, if I'm out into my book and I'm reading, it's probably not one of those times. And it's always so frustrating to be sitting there and having them talk. Because for some reason, to them, reading is not a real activity. You're not actually busy if you're reading. They don't actually take that seriously as being busy. Might be serious to us, but one thing that I always find funny, if you tend to bring up movies, this is part of pop culture. This is accepted to bring up in everyday conversation. But God forbid I ever mention a book. I have one of my friends. I love him dearly. And he's not the only one that I've encountered this with. But anytime I ever talk about books or reading, and I realize that part of it is just because it's something that I'm passionate about, and sometimes people tend to talk to you this way when you're passionate about something, and to an extent I understand. But for some reason, whenever I'm talking to non-readers about a book, it's never perceived the same way as when we bring up movies in a conversation. I tend to receive the reaction of, "Oh, how cute." Why? Because I brought up a book? Because I brought up a book as being relevant to our conversation? And somehow, like, the fact that I brought it up, it's no longer taken seriously in the conversation if it comes from a book, especially among non-readers. I am considered adorable for bringing it up. And all of a sudden, we've skipped over the point that I was trying to make to begin with. And this happens to me quite a bit. And it's never done with mean intentions. I don't take it as being offensive or with mean intentions, but it just sort of adds to the overall umbrella of not being taken seriously when talking about reading and talking about books. The other thing is, I feel like people tend to make certain assumptions about me as a reader. One is that people tend to think that I have very few interests other than books. And although books and reading are a very, very large interest and passion of mine, as I've made another video on before, there are other things that I like to do. Sometimes I like to watch Netflix. Sometimes I like to watch movies. Sometimes I like to go on hikes and maybe go to the park or go out with my friends and go dancing, and there are a lot of things that I love to do. We're all complex human beings with a very diverse range of interests. And readers are no exception to this. We have other interests and passions and things that we like to do. But I tend to get the assumption, I don't know that everybody can relate to this, but I'm hoping I'm not alone on this, that generally people tend to assume that the only interests I have are books. It's not. I realize that I've always got a book in my hand and I can see where that comes from, but I like to do other things too, guys. The last thing I want to talk about in this video is this weird reaction that I seem to get from people that just because I read, that I somehow don't have a sense of the real world. I'm not really sure what one has to do with the other, but this seems to be a very common misperception. I think it goes back to that whole book smarts versus street smarts. But I can tell you guys right now that it's no, one is not exclusive from the other. It's not. I don't really know how that sort of comes about or why that is still such a common misperception because, again, we're all complex human beings. Very complex human beings with a bunch of facets of our personality. Now, growing up, I did not always have an easy life, and I feel like just about everyone can say that about themselves. Everyone has gone through their struggles and through their own challenges. And that's exactly my point. Everybody has a complex history that has built them up to be the person that they are, and a lot of those complexities are going to be struggles and hardships that we've had to learn and overcome. And this applies to everyone, not just everyone minus readers. Readers have had to go through hard things and hardships just the same as everyone else. So just because we enjoy reading and we enjoy admiring these creative worlds that have been built, this imaginary architecture of a story and setting and characters, which still boggles my mind that these great complexities can come out of someone's imagination, and we just love to submerge ourselves in that and just wrap ourselves in it like a blanket. And I will admit that that's part of the appeal of reading, but it doesn't take away from everything else. All of us have learned to live in this world. All of us have learned to find our niche in this world, and some of us are still finding it. And we are all going to have a different experience in this world and learn the world as we encounter it. That's just what we do, and everybody's going to have a different experience in this world. But reading doesn't somehow separate you from that. We still live in the real world like everyone else. We might sometimes escape to these fictional worlds, but that's what they are, fictional. We can't live in those fictional worlds forever as much as we would love to sometimes. I know that I personally wouldn't hate living in a world with shadow hunters. I mean, who wouldn't want to live in a world with shadow hunters? But that's just not the reality, and we know it. We like to pretend it's not so sometimes, but we know it. And we live in the same real world as everyone else. So I never really quite understand that misconception that I encounter pretty often. And for some reason, people tend to not take me as seriously, or sometimes don't take my input as seriously, like somehow I must not know what I'm talking about, because how could I? I'm a reader, so I must be book smart and not street smart. It's very, very strange. But then somebody else who might be a non-reader, and this might not be totally associated with reading, but I find that it's a shift in perception of me that happens after one finds out that I tend to be a reader, that I tend to be a more studious person, and all of these stereotypes tend to fall and rain all over me. But I guess it's just like with anything else. People are very caught up in labels, and they're very caught up in stereotypes, and being a reader has its own stereotypes and misconceptions. I guess by saying this, I'm asking you guys, do you relate to this? Have you ever felt like you were not taken as seriously because your interests fall into reading, or because you tend to like books or want to talk about books, that somehow people don't take it as seriously seriously as they might if you were to tell them you had interest in other things. This is something that I definitely encounter, and again, it's never meant negatively. People never they don't necessarily make fun of me, or there's never any ill intent. So I don't want to make it seem like I'm being bullied in the world because I'm a reader. No, that's not true. I love my friends. I love the people in my life, and I would not trade them for the world. But sometimes it's a little hard when people don't quite understand, or when people still place these misconceptions that are just not true. That are just not true. So I'm just making this video because I want to know that I am not alone in this. I find that very rarely when I make these sort of discussion videos that I am alone, because you guys relate to me sometimes far better than anybody else that I know. But this was just something that was on my mind after I was sort of in fun being made fun of and being called adorable for talking about books and constantly being interrupted while reading because people didn't really take me reading seriously as being a real activity and something worth focusing on. And it was just something that was on my mind. And as always, when these thoughts come rushing in, I share them with you guys. Anyway, I love you guys. I respect you guys as individuals. I respect you guys as readers. And I respect you guys for every facet of your personality, reader or otherwise. You guys are beautiful, complex, amazing people. And I wouldn't have you any other way. So I guess that's it. I will have more videos out soon, and I'll talk to you guys later.